So how are we going to disseminate information on all these unbelievably exciting things we're doing? Well, luckily we have Mike Fisch here to tell us. Mike chairs the Department of Medical Oncology at MD Anderson, and he has research interests in palliative care, symptom management, and healthcare disputes. More importantly, perhaps, he's a recognized expert on medical uses of social media. He himself is a prodigious tweeter, and he's going to tell us how we can and should be using social media to better engage our patients and each other. Bring it home, Mike.
All right. I'm sure you're restless by now. So as we talk about social media and SWOG, let's keep an eye out for some of the lessons from Larry, because I think you'll see some of those themes resonate in my remarks. So I'd like to start with a story. So last Saturday afternoon, during a rain delay in my son's baseball game, I was using my smartphone to look at Twitter and see if there were some colleagues in cancer medicine that might be sharing some good information. And I saw a couple of tweets, including this one from Dr. Cohen, my colleague, which says, "Great TED Talk on how to communicate your vision to create change." So I followed up on that and looked at this TED Talk, and it's a talk by Nancy Duarte on the secret structure of great talks. So knowing that I was going to try to talk to you, I looked at that. And here is the big idea in that TED Talk. The big idea from Nancy Duarte was that she had analyzed certain speeches and other kinds of talks that were effective and found that they sort of shared this common structure. And that structure is sort of outlined here, and it sort of starts with what is, and then a vision for what could be, and talks about some of the tensions and challenges, and it cycles through a few times. And in the end, there's a call to action. And really the hero of the story is the audience, who sort of sees a new way and finds something that works for them moving forward. So I'm going to try to follow this theme a bit and describe the status quo, discuss motivation and trigger for change, share some rules of thumb, invite participation, and in the end you get to be the hero. So the heroic objective is going to be to enhance clinical trial development, conduct, and dissemination. That's the only reason we're here. That's what we do. That's what you've been hearing about today. There's no point in social media for social media's sake, but there's a point in doing that. So what's our starting point? I think our starting point is a little bit of vintage social networking, as you see in this slide, sort of Skype and Pinterest, our version. And so why aren't we doing more social media as cancer professionals? Lots of different reasons. You can pick out the ones that resonate with you, but I think the most common is that we're crazy busy. We have lots going on. Sometimes it seems a bit like a narcissistic indulgence. We've seen some bad things can happen with congressmen or Brett Favre or what have you. A lot of us haven't yet seen anything really that great, so anything super important happen on social media. For some of us, nobody really showed us how to get started. And I think many of us can relate to having tried some of this or had some kind of bad experience and then just kind of shut it down. So I think we can overcome the barriers. As Dr. Ellis told us, we can't be satisfied with the status quo. We're never satisfied with the status quo. That's why we're here. We are all inspired for what could be, and that's what you've been hearing all afternoon. One of those jargon buzzwords, manageable toxicities. We're used to dealing with manageable toxicities now, aren't we? Things that happen, and we figure out how to move forward. We're not afraid to fail. Step by step, we figure it out, how to take things that have potential, refine them, and put them to use so that we can make progress. So whenever you start something new, sort of a behavioral model, these three things have to swim together, right? There has to be a motivation, ability, and then a trigger that says, do this now. So what's our motivation? I think one motivation is that we're not satisfied with our accrual status. We sometimes are too slow with accrual. Our second motivation, which resonates with, I think, point number 2 from lessons from Larry, it's the patient's stupid. It's where the patients are. People at risk for cancer, people who are currently being treated for cancer, and millions of cancer survivors are using social media to try to figure things out, to get information, to interact about their lives in the context of cancer. It's where others are gaining influence with our patients. So another lesson from Larry is, number 3 was try to do better. And number 4 was prepare for change. You know, I think we have a motivation. So what's the trigger? It's Chuck. Chuck says, it's time to do this. Let her rip. The rationale and goals for this initiative were incorporated into that grant, part of the lovingly crafted grant. And so I think you can tell yourself, I'm learning to do this to help SWOG because we want to make progress. And I think, you know, I can relate to that. I had the same barriers as many of all of you do with some of this stuff. And it was in the context of ASCO service, working with the ASCO Integrated Media and Technology Committee, that I sort of got over the hump to at least try it, see it with a bit more equipoise, to be a bit more creative because I was doing it because ASCO wanted me to do it. So this is your trigger. So there are 6 types of social media. You might be familiar with social networking like Facebook or LinkedIn or Doximity, the physician-only site. Twitter is kind of considered microblogging. There's media sharing like YouTube, which is where I saw that TED Talk ultimately, Twitter and then media sharing. Bookmarking sites, social news, blog comments like ASCO Connection, where you can comment on some of the essays that ASCO members are writing. So what are we talking about? Let's start with Twitter. We can't sort of tackle all that all at once. We've got to start somewhere. Let's curate good information about trials and about cancer in general, and let's put our authentic, professionalized voices out in there for our patients so that we can make a difference. So a little bit of the basics, the how-to. Tweets are basically 140 characters worth of text information. The @ sign is used to sort of call out the entity or a username. Hashtags are basically indexing techniques. So you could hashtag a word or a symbol, and it helps you find information across different tweets. RT stands for retweet. We've been talking about amplification in our science talks, but in this sense, it's a way of amplifying a signal, a message. Retweeting, or MT, stands for modified tweet, which is the same sort of thing. And it's not just what you can do with 140 characters, because you can't say that much about a lot of complex things in 140 characters, but you can provide a headline that takes people to a web link within the tweet, and then the web link gives you the details that you need. And you can use certain techniques to be able to shorten those web links so they don't use up all your Twitter character space. So how do you get started? You know, there's a little bit of downtime at these kind of meetings, or you're stuck at the airport for a while. You know, set up an account, go to twitter.com, choose a username, add a short bio, and I'll give you an example of what those bios might look like. Start following certain kinds of relevant people or groups, the NCI, your institution, ASCO, cancer people, each other, and then retweet something, get a feel for stuff, or tweet something, and use hashtag SWOGonc. SWOGonc is how we're going to find each other. If you say something on Twitter that you want other people in this kind of crowd to notice, or you want to share, they're going to find it because they'll look for hashtag SWOGonc, and you'll get on the same page with them. So a couple of examples, if you're not sort of knowing how to start. You know, you don't care about what Ashton Kutcher had for breakfast or what Brad Pitt's doing, but, you know, at SWOG, at the NCI, at ASCO, you know, you might care about what these groups are saying. Maybe they'll tell you what ODAC voted on this past week that maybe matters to you. And then you can follow these hashtags to find these themes. So SWOGonc, or you can, you know, look for certain pathways like PIK3CA or your disease, your committee. Or when you go to the ASCO meeting, look at hashtag ASCO13, and you'll see what other people are noticing that's important at the meeting. The things that are most relevant at ASCO are going to bubble up for you to see when you do this. Hashtag BCSM stands for breast cancer social media. If you're interested in what people are saying about breast cancer, health professionals, advocates, surgeons, radiation therapists, all kinds of people, you can find it. And then you can follow certain individuals, and there's no way to make a perfect list, but just give you some idea. The ones in yellow are some of the people in this group. In blue, a couple of ASCO leaders who are out there, and the ones in white are some other experienced cancer professionals who tweet sometimes. So just take a few examples of what you might see. This example, Antonio Wolf, who's a medical oncologist at Johns Hopkins. And so Antonio's bio here, that 160-character bio, says, medical oncologist, breast cancer researcher, and professor at Johns Hopkins. Views expressed are my own. RT/MT implies an interesting tweet, not an endorsement. So it kind of sets the stage, right? And what kind of things do you see when you follow a cancer professional's tweets? Let's look at the first one. It says RT at RSM 2800. So RSM 2800 is Bob Miller, one of Antonio's colleagues, who's the new editor of Cancer.net at ASCO, and a very good cancer professional who tweets. And he wrote, I think a big misconception about clinical trials is that they are, quote, last resort. In many cases, they may be the best first option. So that's a message that we might believe in. We might want to put that kind of message out there, out into the world, so people who are going to their first appointment with their oncologist might have that kind of thought in mind. They may be looking for a clinical trial because they'll follow an authentic health professional at Johns Hopkins or in SWOG, et cetera. And so when Antonio saw that from Bob Miller, he retweeted it, which is a way of amplifying that signal. And so that's kind of how it goes. There's a certain Bayesian quality to curating good information. That is to say, the likelihood that you see a given tweet is influenced by how worthwhile that tweet is, because other people retweet and amplify and talk about good information. So pointless things have a natural tendency to disappear, and great information amplifies, and you're more likely to see it. That's the magic of this. And sort of giving you an example here, if ASCO tweets, raise the bar for clinical trials in pancreas, lung, breast, and colon, and then refers to a report, and you click on the bitty link and you look at the report and you think, this summary of recommended targets for clinical trials with granular detail about hazard ratios, that's really useful. I might want to have those things in mind when I come to the SWOG meeting. So you say worth a look and you retweet it, and your colleagues see that, and then you're kind of on the same page when you come to SWOG. Twitter is useful as a journal club. So here's an example, Mark Lewis, who's a general oncologist and a SWOG member, who has expertise in MEN1, and he tweets that menin complex suppresses hedgehog signaling, creates a potential tumor target in MEN1. And so if you are a patient or an expert or a lab researcher not in SWOG, you're interested in MEN1, and you look at that hashtag, you'll find that tweet, even though you've never heard of Mark Lewis. But if you follow Mark Lewis because he's in SWOG or whatever, you'll see it there also. And if you click on that link, it'll take you to the article, and you might find that article pretty useful. There are other platforms for use in Twitter, and I don't want to sort of boggle your brain with this, except sometimes people are sort of wondering, how am I going to deal with this fire hose of information? And it turns out there are ways to sort of parse it out and make dashboards and just look for NCI tweets or PI3K tweets or what have you. So you don't have to take it as a fire hose, and there are ways to sort of deal with this. There are key leaders tweeting, which I think sends an interesting message, because these are very busy people, and they're not interested in doing pointless or mostly dangerous things. But they're sending tweets with useful information, and here are some examples. Dr. Shilsky, for example, says 54 codes for breast cancer in ICD-10, and that's without molecular profiling. Sort of interesting to people in cancer medicine who haven't yet looked into those details. Chuck last night tweeted that the first meeting of the SWOG AYA committee drew 50-plus people. So you've heard about that several times in this meeting, but Chuck had a way of sharing that last night. And you know what? If you weren't here at the plenary to hear that point emphasized, if you missed the meeting, you had a chance to find it by just following swogonc and seeing that Chuck told you that something exciting is happening in AYA. And Julie Growlow has a number of very nice tweets as well, and an example of some tweets where she's interacting directly with groups of cancer patients and the breast cancer social media group, for example, and is influential there. Some resources for getting started includes an ASCO-derived sort of practical guidance on the use of social media for oncology, led by Dr. Don Dyson. And then there's an Annals position paper on online medical professionalism that may be worth looking at. ASCO has put together 10 tips for use of social media. This was just released actually this afternoon on the web at the ASCO meeting. I think they'll have cards with these tips on them. And it involves, number one, get involved, engage often, identify yourself, protect patient confidentiality and privacy. So when I talk about interacting with patients, I'm not talking about your patients. You have other ways of interacting with your patients. We're talking about people out there in general terms. Avoiding impropriety, giving credit where credit is due, and really your professionalism. This is your professional sort of avatar, and you have all the right reflexes as long as you know that that's who you're being when you're in this space. And it's worth noticing your own institution's guidelines on this so you're familiar with that. So getting back to this story, this TED Talk that I found, Nancy Duarte, she said these stories and talks start with an ordinary world. There's a call to adventure, and then there's sort of a refusal to call because of barriers, and then a meeting with a mentor, and you sort of get over the hump, and then we cross the threshold together. So the bottom line, I think, is that the more SWOG members who tweet, the more we'll learn from each other, the more we'll understand, it's the patient stupid, that's the patient and caregiver's perspective we're trying to connect with, and will influence cancer care and science for the better through the clinical trial work that we do here. So here's the next steps. Here's the ask from you. Sign up on Twitter. Send a tweet to SWOG. Say, @SWOG, let's engage, #SWOGONC. And if you're interested in working on this, being creative, and want to get involved with the social media working group, @Fisch MD, count me in for @SWOG social media. So let her rip. Thanks a lot.